So, hello and welcome to another exciting episode of Releasing Your Inner Dragon with Drake and Marie. I am Drake. I'm an award-winning novelist. I was the lead fiction writer for a massive game from Sony. I write for other games. I write for a living. It's what I do. I also teach writing all over the world. This is my co-host, Marie.
I'm a YouTuber with a fantasy world building YouTube channel called Just in Time Worlds and a fantasy author.
If you guys like what we're doing and you want us to continue producing cool free content, you do have an obligation in this relationship, and that is you need to subscribe, like, favorite, you know the drill. But literally, if you guys don't do this, then we don't get out there and we eventually end up having to stop doing this. So if you want to keep us basically doing this podcast and giving you information through this, that, you know, through the lens of how we see this information, then just meet your obligation, dude. You know, you just got to do it.
Thumbs up button, favorites, share with people.
All right, so today we're going to kind of focus on religion, and again, not religion in the real world. That's a disclaimer. We're not talking about your religion. We're not talking about my religion. We're talking about fantasy religions and creating fantasy religions. And before we get into that, though, we're going to start with, like we like to do every once in a while, we're going to start with a trope, although this one ties in really well. It doesn't have 100% locked in name, but we're going to call it the trope of church headwear, sort of a play off of the trope of hats trope. Because what we're talking about today in this trope section is something that I find tons in fantasy literature, and it is so stupid and so unrealistic. But it's basically where the religion is all something, all good, all evil, you know, whatever. And that just, it's so unrealistic. It just doesn't happen. You know, maybe the religion is evil, but there's still going to be people that believe in it, that believe that they're doing good things in it. Matter of fact, it's very hard to find a villain that doesn't believe that their ultimate goal is something good. So let's just start off, Marie. What do you kind of think about the trope of the church headwear?
So I think that it is an extremely easy trap to fall into. And it depends on whether your POV characters come from the church or whether they oppose the church, right? And if they oppose the church, it is extremely easy to just have them encounter bad guy after bad guy from the church without giving any consideration to maybe there might be a good guy or two amongst all of these bad guys.
I'd even go a little further than that. Maybe these guys that are bad guys to you actually see you as the bad guy, that they're on the side of good and you're the one trying to mess everything up.
100%. I guess that the problem with that point of view is that that's not going to be what the reader sees, right? Because what the reader sees is what the POV character sees, and the POV character sees people coming to kill him. The fact that these people think that they are justified is not going to make a difference to the dude fighting for his life, right?
True.
And if you don't leaven that with some people who, you know, maybe they think that these people coming to kill him are misguided. Maybe they think that these people who are coming to kill him have deviated from the true teachings of the church. But whatever reason, there needs to be some offset against it. I think there's also a temptation to make churches be all corrupt. And that's just not, again, it's not realistic. There are people who truly deeply find meaning in their religion, and they become priests and teachers and deacons, and they become these, you know, people in the church, and it brings meaning to their lives. And if your religion is an entirely corrupt, venal church, like every member of the church from top to bottom is out for cash or whatever, you know, power or whatever it is, it's not real.
Now,
The same, by the way, goes for all good.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, I do think it can work for a smaller group if they call it a religion, but it's this very hive mind group of people who are trying to get, they all want power, they all want whatever. Then that can be believable, but that's not really a religion.
To me, that's more cult.
Well, but it's not even a cult, really, in my opinion. It's a group of like-minded people.
Mm,
Because once you expand it to a religion, even if you expand it to a cult, which may be only 50 people or whatever, there are going to be people in that that are in it because they think it's the right thing, that they think it's they don't see maybe the leadership echelon or whatever that are just making this stuff up, and they know they're lying and they know they're doing it for power and prosperity. If you're a couple people that are like, oh, we're going to start a religion and we're just going to get tons of money, but no one ever believes in your religion because you're just a piece of garbage, then you don't really get power or money. So there has to be something about it that
mm,
will make someone else, even if I don't believe it, if I'm the head,
mm.
and I absolutely do not believe any of this bullcrap that I'm spitting, there has to be something that I'm spitting that makes other people go, oh my goodness, that's exactly truth. Oh, here's some money, man, because I need to help you really spread this word. This is going to save humanity or save elfdom or whatever. So even if it's based in horrible, immoral stuff,
Mm.
there has to be something about it that's going to get other people who are not out to get what you're trying to get. Some altruistic, some loving, good type. It just has to be. It can't just all be, hey, we got a religion where everybody is just greedy and just gets a bunch of money.
Even worse is if you have all of the church leadership be evil and greedy, but the church members are not. It's like, how does that work?
Right.
Are all these people so stupid that they cannot see through the con? Because that's what you're implying here. That's rough.
Right. Yeah, no, there has to be, I've said this before on this podcast. The best lie is grounded in truth.
Mm.
So you have to give them as much truth as you can possibly give them and as little lie as you need to use to get what you're looking for. If you're if you're using this as a grift,
Yeah.
then that's what the best grifters always did. They didn't come in and went, I've got some snake oil that I'm going to sell you that I literally made from my own urine, and I'm going to tell you that it's going to heal your cancer, but it's not, so give me some money.
Yeah.
Like, no, that's not how it works. You have to get as close to the truth as possible, but of course you're still lying, so it isn't true. So you're never going to get 100% true, because if you actually walked in and said, I got this magic elixir that cures cancer, and here, this woman has cancer, let me give it to her, I'm gonna give it to you for free, I'm gonna give everybody free, like, then you're not grifting anybody, you're just being altruistic.
Exactly.
And it's the same thing on the other side. A church that's all good. And it really comes down to, that Drakeism that I love to throw around a lot, which is every plot device is going to have both complexity and complications.
Hmm.
And you always want every plot device to add more complications than complexity. Complications are things that are added in the story that make it dramatic, that make things difficult to do. We want to make things difficult for our characters. We want to make things difficult for the plot. We want to make things difficult. So complications add that. All complications come with complexity. And what complexity is having to describe and explain and, write whys and all of this other stuff. And so anytime I'm adding something to a story, I always weigh it on the scale of complexity versus complications. And complexity has to be lighter. I don't even like it to be equal, because at equal, it's still too much work for the reward that I'm getting, because the reward is the complexity. I'm sorry, the complication.
Mm.
That's the reward. That's what I want to add to my story. I want to add, oh, we have this really good religion, but there's a couple people, maybe at the top or maybe in the middle that are really corrupt, trying to screw everything over. Okay, so that's a complication. But how complex is that? How hard is that going to be for me to put that in the story and write it in the story and explain it to the readers so that they truly understand what's going on without being info dumpy, without being telly and all this other stuff? And so everything I add, every plot device, and it's not just the big ones like religion or magic or whatever, like, this character has a brother. Okay, does that add complexity? Does it add complications? Why does it have a brother? Why does this character have a brother? What is complicated about that? What is it adding to the story that is going to be dramatic? Sometimes the answer is nothing. Sometimes just, I just want them to know that this character had a family.
Mm.
Okay, great. Then that's just character building. There's no complications. There's no complexity. You don't have to explain that. Everybody knows what a brother is or a sister or whatever. So, and you're just trying to build them, like in the Genesis saga, I got so many pieces of email on fans theorizing what I was going to use the boy's father for, Tannen, because they meet him and he's this salt of the earth, honest, hardworking, dude. And everybody's like, oh, I get it. I see what you're doing. He's going to be this and he's going to be that. And, some secret warrior or some secret mage or this powerful, ex-leader. And I'm like, no, he's a farmer. He was born a farmer. He's going to die a farmer. He's just a really good human being. There's no complexity to it and there's no complications to it. What it did for me was it allows you to know the man who raised these two boys, so that as you follow them out in the real world and you start seeing them struggle against these moral dilemmas that they're presented with, that they had this type of upbringing. And so when they start questioning their own motives and questioning their own decisions, you get, and especially if I bring back man, if I did this, Papa would beat my butt. And you get it. You're like, oh yeah, he would, because that's a good man. Like, he would not do that. And so it adds a bit of realism, but there's no complexity or complications to that. It just adds character development, character growth, character backstory.
Mm.
But sometimes, he has a brother. Well, because the brothers, and I always hate this, and this is actually the funny thing is I don't say this very often, but back in 2000, I don't know, 2003, when I started getting the idea for the Genesis saga, I literally built it around the fact how much I hate that the villain is the brother of the hero, and the only reason why he's the villain is because his brother's the hero. I mean, that's like saying, okay, sir, why are you a serial killer? Well, I'm a serial killer. I don't like killing, but my brother was a doctor, and I freaking hate that he's a doctor, so I'm just going to murder people. Yeah, so it's like, no, that's not why people become serial killers. No one becomes a bank robber because their brother made more money than them. That's not how it works. And so literally, I hated that so much that I started the idea, the kernel of Genesis was, can I write two brothers that are kind of at odds with each other and doing different things, but they're both heroes. They're both going to save the world. And then from that idea, over the couple of years that I thought about it, it expanded into this thing. And again, now that adds complications, but it's still a brother-brother relationship. So it doesn't add a ton of complexity to it. It's easy to understand that two brothers have different opinions about how the world should be handled. So it's the same, bring it back into religion. If I'm going to add any type of religion, and it's going to be integral to the story, then it's going to add complexity, because it's a new religion that doesn't exist. I've got to explain it. I've got to build it out. I've got to flesh it out. I've got to let it seep in every aspect of humanity. Is that worth the complications that it brings to the table that are going to make my character struggle through overcomes?
Yeah.
And the problem with the trope of the Church of Headgear is the fact that it's just, one, it's not realistic, but two, it's just this one thing. And like, okay, yeah, so everyone in this church is evil. Why? There are some times where I've seen it work. Any times you've seen it work? I can think of one.
If that is your central plot device, you could make it work, maybe. What are you thinking of?
So mine aren't really religions. Well, one, I guess you could kind of say is religion, but let's start with the one that kind of isn't. The Death Eaters from Harry Potter. But that goes back to what we were talking about earlier, where it's a very small group.
Yeah.
They want power and, magical ability and to rule the world. And so, that's what they're doing. And so it is a focus group. So not necessarily religion, but the one that you could claim as religion are the dark friends in the Wheel of Time. So these, yes, are people that have sold their soul to Satan, because that's what the dark one is in the Wheel of Time. But they know that they're getting, they're doing it to get this thing. So they're actually giving him worship and giving him power. But the beautiful thing about what Robert Jordan did in that is it doesn't work out for any of them.
Yeah.
Like, all of these dark friends went into this religion for a very selfish, narcissistic reasons, and they all end up regretting it or killing themselves, or, you know, just being used until they're of no value anymore to the Dark One, and then he throws them away like trash.
Yeah.
And so I did really like the motifs that he was playing with there, because he's talking about, sure, you can sell your soul for, you know, a moment of gratification, and it's going to feel good then, but now you sold your soul, and there will be ramifications from that. There will be consequences. And so that's the human thematic element that he was playing with on that side. But all dark friends are evil, all of them, you know, and it works because you know that they've kind of done something.
Yeah, so I would say that they've deliberately taken a corruptive force into themselves, like a supernatural corruptive force, and I mean that also is somewhat different, right, from a
Some of them
religion.
also believe that the Dark One's going to win,
Mm,
and I just want to be on the right, on the winning side.
yeah,
I don't care if I'm on the right side.
I
I
just
want
want
to
to
be on
be on
the
the winning side.
right. You know, sort of like one of the writers of the realm, one of his favorite jokes that he loves to say is the reason why he's so nice to his computers and all his phones and everything like that is because when the robot takes over, he wants to show that he's been doing really, really good work for the machines, so
I,
that
for
they.
one, welcome our machine overlords and will serve faithfully.
That's basically what he says all the time. Like, I'll get mad at my phone and I'll fling it over on the couch or something like that. He's like, "How dare you? Don't you dare do something like that. That's blasphemous." Like, what happens when they take over? They're gonna know you did that. Like, that could be one of the AI's children that you just threw across the room.
Friend
So,
computer is going to get you.
right. So, yeah, I mean, but that's also kind of selfish and narcissistic as well.
Yes.
And that's realistic. There's a ton of people in this world that are selfish and narcissistic, that are doing horrible things because they think it's going to put them, you know, on top.
Yeah.
Literally go around our world to just the governments of our world and just say that leader of this is that, and that leader of that is that, and that leader of this is this. Throughout history, you know, they did this stuff that they knew was horrible, that killed tens of thousands, if not millions of people, and they didn't care because they got wealthy and power, and they got to live a great life.
Yeah.
And so they didn't care how many millions died as long as they lived like gods. And so that is believable.
It is believable. But it is also, I mean, even in those kinds of regimes and kingdoms and religions, etc., there were people who believed that they were genuinely doing the right thing. There are people who did heinous things and believed they were doing the right thing. Right? There were people who burned other people at the stakes and believed that they were saving their souls. Like, that also happened.
Yep.
You know, so they could be doing terrible things while thinking they're doing the right things, or they could be despicable beings who are using their religion as an excuse, or there could be people saying, no, but they're doing it wrong, and that's not what the religion is like. You know, and you need all of these people in your religion. Otherwise, it's not a realistic religion. Otherwise, it's
Right.
not realistic to people,
Right.
and it feels one dimensional.
I always go back to this when we get to this type of topic, because a lot of people go, "Oh, but it's a fantasy where I can do whatever I want." Well, yeah, but remember, the only thing that's real is the reader.
Yeah.
Your characters aren't real. Your world isn't real. Your religion isn't real. Literally nothing is real in your story except for the reader.
Mm-hmm.
So if you create this thing that doesn't relate to the reader, then what good is it? Why have you done it? It's not worth it, because the only thing that matters, and I say this all the time, is the reader. Everything's about the reader. It's always about the reader. That's my job. My job is entertain the reader. My job is not to create fantasy stories or fantasy religions or fantasy characters. That's sure, that's a byproduct of my job. That's how I accomplish my job. That's the tools. But my job is to entertain readers. Period. All the rest of that is just tools that I use to do that job. And I think a lot of writers miss that, especially when they do something like this, where they're like, you know, oh, this whole church is all evil, or everybody in this church is just absolutely as goody two shoes as they could possibly be. It's just,
Church
it's
made
not
entirely of paladins. No.
right. Or paladins
No.
for you Americans out there.
I'm Finnish. I can't pronounce English anyway.
No, it's fine. It's fine.
I speak
I love
Finnish.
paladins. I might start using that word now. I'm going to roll up a paladin. A goody two shoes paladin. It's a cool word. Yeah, I mean, it's just I mean, I think we're about done with the trope of hats, or the trope of church headgear.
Headgear.
Um, just like the trope of hats, it's dumb, it's lazy. You're not putting any effort into it. Like Marie said, it really does come down to how integral it's going to be to the story. If the characters are railing against the religion, then yeah, you're going to have to flesh this out, and maybe they do run into a lot of evil people or whatever. Especially if you're writing a limited edition, because one of the things you said earlier did make me slap myself in the face for something I said, because you're right, because I do preach this. If you're in a limited POV, those characters are the narrator, not you. And you can't describe anything in a way that the character doesn't think it. So in other words, the example that I use in the dynamics, or in the Better Writing Through Stronger Narrative book, is, so you have this college professor that your character hates. He thinks he's narcissistic and just selfish and hates his students and everything like that. You can't then have this professor stand up at the beginning of class and go, all right, students, first of all, thank you guys for all of the gifts that you gave me for, thanking me for going over to this foreign country and doing this altruistic work that I lost my leg doing. I really appreciate the well wishes while I was in the hospital. After that, after I killed that lion with my bare hands to save 300, little village children. Thank you so much for that. But you know what? It was worth it. I'd do it again. Like, he can't say that if the character's like, look at him, he's just selfish. He just does nothing but for himself. And it's like that just so doesn't work. So you're right. If you do have a character that is against the religion, then yeah, you're going to have to describe things the way they see it. But the opportunity there is to have them run into
a good guy.
Well, at least a character in that organization that you can't just justify and say, yes, you're evil, I'm going to kill you now. You have to, that's a beautiful opportunity to make that character grow, because obviously they're a bigot. They're bigoted toward this organization, and maybe the organization is evil, maybe, but it doesn't necessarily mean every single component, every person in that isn't there for other reasons. Exactly. And so that's a great way to show growth in your character, to go, wow, I thought everyone in this thing was terrible. And obviously that's the way you would, bring it up in the beginning. But as the character grows, you can also show them. But you would do that because it adds complications to your story.
Yes.
As well as complexity. And that's where you get drama.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Let's move on to a discussion of how to write and, by extension, build religions, because obviously you can't write what you haven't world built, right? So what is the thing, I guess, that you feel most writers get wrong with religion?
And that's actually a very easy question to me. I feel that the number one thing that writers miss when they're creating religions is they don't believe it themselves. Like, one of the things that always bothered me for decades, I would watch any type of show that had Roman, in it. It was, if it was a, TV show, movie, whatever. And every time the characters would go and worship the Roman gods, it was always like, oh, haha, look at me. I'm worshiping this fake religion. And it's obvious I don't believe in this bull crap. And that's not how it was. And then when HBO dropped Rome, and for what I remember, that's the first time where a show, those characters worshipped those Roman gods. They worshipped it as hard as whatever you worship, whatever that is. If you're a Christian, you worship God. If you're, Buddhist, and you whatever it is that you worship, or atheist and you worship the worshiping of nothing, whatever it is, you believe it wholeheartedly. And that's how you have to approach the religions in your world. If it's a true religion and people truly believe it, then they're going to believe it as strongly as you believe whatever you believe. And if you don't allow them that belief, I think that's where you really do a disservice to your religion.
Building on that, what I find most often when I read fantasy religions is the authors don't allow enough of the religion to come through. People who are honestly religious pray. They think about, what would my God think? What would my church think? What are the rules of my church? It informs their daily lives. It informs the routine of their days. there are things that they would not do because it is against the teachings of their religion, right? Because it is against the teachings of their religion as they understand it. There are people that they give automatic respect to because of their religion. And those things are ingrained in them. Even if they leave the religion, the cultural stamp remains. And I think that is one of the things that fantasy authors, especially atheist authors, and I'm not picking on atheist authors, I'm one myself, but because we don't have that, it is often very hard to think of a character doing that and a character being like that. And a character, especially when it's a point of view character, it should inform their decisions. It should inform their thoughts. It should be a thing that reflects in who they are. And if it doesn't, then the religion isn't impactful enough on them.
So one thing to piggyback off of that, and then I'm going to circle back around and drop something else. But it's another Drakeism. But I always say, a lot of people think imagination is the number one skill a author needs, especially like in fantasy or sci-fi or whatever. And I always say, nope, it is not the number one. It might be number two, might be number three. But the number one thing an author needs is empathy. You must be able to understand and feel why these characters feel what they feel. Because if you don't have empathy, your characters will always come off flat. It is the number one thing that you absolutely have to have if you're going to make this stuff realistic and impactful for the audience. And I think because I am such an empathetic person, empathetic, whatever, because I am the romantic of my relationship. I think that's the biggest reason why my characters are so impactful to readers, is because I literally make them, not only do I understand the characters, I let the characters allow the readers to understand them at a very deep and intimate level. And so that has this huge impact on them. But to circle and also add to this from a different angle, this is also a skill. This is something that you will grow into. So most of especially my fans who are all chagrined that the third book of the Genesis Saga has never dropped when it should have dropped back in 2012. So it is 10 years late, and it's still going to be 3 years before you get it, because they know I'm rewriting the series. Farmers and Mercenaries is my first book I ever published. Yes, it won awards. Yes, it actually gave me the fame that I've got. Yes, it gathered me the fan base that I have. But I'm not the same writer as that anymore. And so since I have the rights back to it, because of that publisher going out of business and all of that, I want to bring it up to my level, which is, right now the target date, by the way, if anybody's wondering, is June. That's when this rewritten book is coming out, and I'm working my butt off to hit this goal. But one of the things that I'm doing, because there's tons of things that I'm fixing and improving, and I've just become a better writer, stronger writer. But one of them is I had religion in the first book, and they did believe it, but I didn't lean into it as heavy as I should have. There's 12 gods of man, and they do have little trinkets that they carry around with them for luck. That there's an entire industry of carving little things that look like each of the 12 gods and all this stuff. And I kind of had it in the original. Like there's a scene where one of the characters is getting ready to go off on a dangerous mission, and he's not a believer, and his wife comes running up to him. She's already been heartbroken that he's doing this stuff and stuff like that, but she runs up and she presses one of the god's talisman in his hand, and he thinks to himself, man, if a wooden carving could make all this better, I would wear 30 of them, because he just doesn't believe. But his wife does. And so that was in the original, and there's a few other little things that are in there. But one of the things that I've done with this rewrite is to really understand now, after being a professional writer for nearly 20 years now, that you do want to lean into this stuff, especially since religion is so integral to this story that I'm telling, even though it doesn't feel that way in the beginning. But by book 3, you realize the entire story is about religion, even though it has nothing to do with anything. But to make that stronger with the rewrite, I'm leaning into it. So like now, there's a first chapter of this one farmer kid who, in his first chapter, he wakes up and he goes downstairs and has breakfast. That's really all that happens. It happened in the original, it happens in the rewrite. But one of the things in the rewrite is when he puts on his clothes, he actually reaches into his pocket and he pulls out a little statue of one of the gods, and he does a little silent prayer to it, and then he puts it back in his pocket, and it takes a paragraph. And that's it. And then he never mentioned it again until his next chapter, where he's like, it comes up again because something happens that made him go, "Ooh, I need to be thankful for this because obviously this guy did this for me." And so I'm just leaning into it so much more now to really bring that beautiful flavor of religion to this world. Where in the original one, me as a writer in 2002, 2003, which is about when I started kind of thinking and working on this, I put a little bit of seasoning, like I put a little bit of salt in the stew, but not enough for you to taste. I mean, maybe a little bit, but nothing. And as I always say with world building stuff, it's just like a spice. You don't want to put in too little. You don't want to put in too much. You want to put in enough that enhances the flavor. So when I say I'm leaning into it, I mean, I'm leaning into it to put enough that makes it very flavorful, not overpowering.
Yeah.
That's the other thing that you have to think about with religion. Just like you said, if your religion is real, they're going to believe it. And then actually one more thing I want to jump onto this.
I just want to
Go ahead.
interject there.
Yeah,
Your
go ahead.
religion can be real without your gods being real. So you can have a real religion that the gods might or might not be real. Don't make the mistake. Like, there are people who believe it even if the god is not real or
Let's
is
table
real.
that for a second.
Yeah.
That's a big discussion, and that should be the next section that we talk about on this. Because there's one last thing that I do want to kind of add to just the believability, just why they should believe. You also have to think about the time frame. If you're writing fantasy, so one of my fans, I was talking to him just this week. She asked me, and I said I was talking to him, but I just remembered it was a girl. So she asked me, what time frame is this about? Because when I read this, I was thinking it was this time frame, and when I read that, I thought it was this time frame. And it is something I've thought about a lot, but no fan has ever asked me that, which was really interesting. And it kind of made me go down that, because that's really, when we're talking about religion and how it permeates, you also have to know kind of what time frame your world is at. It's a fake world, so it didn't have our history. But still, I believe, and this is just my belief is the reason why humanity has always had religion is that religion's number one job for a human, whether you believe it's real or not, I'm not talking about that. I'm saying the number one job that I feel a human needs religion for is to explain things we can't explain. So, the ground rumbles. There must be a pissed off God under there. Let's throw a virgin to him. And then it's like, oh, wait, there's this thing called plate tectonics. Okay. Yeah, we probably shouldn't throw virgins to that, should we? Like, you just grow with knowledge. And that's why no matter how far archaeologists have gone back in time, they've always found religion, always. And the religion gets bigger and more immersive and more invasive the further back you go, because they knew less. And so that's another thing that I keep in mind. And so, like, the weird thing about the question that she asked, I was like, it's a really weird question, because they're still using swords and horses, but it's kind of the late 1800s in technology. They have, well, even more than that. It's like the 1920s in some aspects, because magic is real. And so, like, in the rich people's homes, they actually have a box that you can open door on that is perpetually cold inside. It's literally a refrigerator. Now, they don't have Freon, because they can just have a wizard go, boom, there you go. The box will be cold for the rest of eternity. And so, they do, because again, everything in society comes down to food, communication, protection. Like, there's some very basic things that's going to drive all of society all the time. And so when I'm creating this world and when I'm creating, how this magic works, it's a very industrial magic. It isn't fireballs and lightning bolts and anything like that. It's I call it carpentry magic. When you first meet magic in this world, it takes hours for someone to do something. And you actually get a class on that, where, he's like, they burn a piece of parchment. And he's like, could I use magic to make it unburnt? And he's like, yeah, but why would you? I mean, it would take you like 6 hours. Just go down to the market and buy another piece of paper. It's way easier. So it's very industrial magic. It doesn't happen quickly. Now that changes for reasons and all of that, because it is fantasy. But the understanding what time zone you're in relative to our world can really help you understand of how invasive, how much these people truly believe this type of religion.
I like to call that knowing what technology level you're at, rather than time zone. Because, as you say, magic can replace a lot of things, right? So, but then magic becomes your technology. It becomes a magitech kind of world. And in that case, You know, you're still going to have people who've made scientific advances, and scientific advances does tend to reduce religion, especially if your scientific advances are also into things like magic. So maybe at the beginning, you know, your people were like, magic, you know, magic comes from the gods. It's the gods doing these things. And then as time progresses, they're like, actually, magic is done through blah, 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 blah. And it becomes less necessary to have God. And then you know, God becomes a smaller and smaller gap to fill.
The same girl that I was having this conversation with when we were talking about this, she's a big Trekkie, and she was like, "Oh, it's like the Prime Directive." You know, the reason why when we go to a primitive culture, we don't want to show our technology because they'll just think we're gods.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of the same thing. You know, maybe in the past, when these first wizards or shaman or whatever starting to do miraculous things, everyone's like, "Oh, you know, obviously you might be a deity or whatever.
You are the priest of the god, because look at the power that you can call down."
Mm-hmm.
And then later on, it's like, oh no, wait, actually, magic works like blah blah blah, and you know.
In Genesis, when they actually flip their vision so they can see the magic realm, it just looks, I describe it, it literally looks like atoms, like they can see atoms, and then they literally just start mixing and matching different parts of the atoms to create, it's sort of like, you know, allomancy, where lead is just one element off from gold, and if I could just change that, add one little electron to it, or take one, I think it's add one, whatever, I'm not a scientist, then bam, I've got gold. I don't have lead anymore. And so it's kind of that's where I developed the magic system off of, is literally based off of, you can see these magical atoms and you can manipulate these magical atoms, because they're not actual atoms. You know, matter is still matter and it's still made up of atoms, but all matter also has this magical things in it. They're called spectrals, and they're really kind of described, the way I see them, is kind of like being able to flip your vision and to be able to see the atoms and everything, and then just manipulate those atoms, and you can do all sorts of crazy stuff. But you can't catch the fireball. You know, it's not that type of magic. The reason why I want to really touch on that here is because I do believe that the more primitive a society is, the more they're going to not only rely on religion, but the more invasive it's going to be. They're going to wake up and they're going to do their morning prayers, their afternoon prayers. They're going to go to church. They're going to do all this stuff. They're going to devote their lives to it, because they truly believe that if they don't, the ground will open up and swallow them. Lava will spit out of this mountain. Tornadoes will come by and pick up their children. Hurricanes will sweep their, you know, families out to sea, because the gods are doing this. And I didn't appease the gods.
I do want to say that for all that, you know, I give the Roman Catholic Church a lot of hell, because they're deserving of a lot of hell. There was a time period where the majority of scholarship took place within the church. Not going to deny it. The same applies actually in the, although I don't know if the imams themselves did the research in Islam, or if it was just Muslim scientists who did the research. I wonder if it was the same thing. I don't actually know enough about the Islamic golden period to speak authoritatively. So, but during a certain period of time, most of the knowledge was preserved inside of monasteries and churches.
What's also kind of reason for that?
Yeah.
They are the only ones that, you know, if the religion is successful, they don't have to work for their money. People just give them money. So they have time, but it's the same, you know, it's the same thing. You have to have a society that has, or at least a portion of that society that has the time, to where they're not spending all of their effort just living to tomorrow. And then they can go, wow, I got all this extra time. I should think about something. And that's what creates it. And so the church has always been, especially in our past, not so much anymore, but in the past, absolutely, they were some of the only people, those and the aristocrats, but the aristocrats are stupid and didn't care. So the intellectuals,
and to be fair, the aristocrats also had like other things on their mind, like hitting their neighbors over the head and taking their land, you know.
And also, you know, marrying their sisters or cousins, whatever. Anyway,
you can tell we're real aristocratic lovers over here.
Right.
Us too.
Right. So, I mean, that is, in my opinion, why so much of, or the church handled so much of scientific research and scholarships and or, you know, the scholarly types, because they were fed every day. They had a place to sleep every day. They had guards to make sure that they didn't get mugged and raped and murdered every day. So since they didn't have to worry about all this other stuff, that gave them a lot of time to go, wow, you know, well, what are those things up in the sky?
I guess the other thing is as well, like they could all read and write, because they've been taught to do so, to consume, you know, the holy message. things that wouldn't have value to the normal person who maybe couldn't read and write. Because until the printing press, the majority of people weren't taught to read and write, not because they're stupid, but because what would they use it on? Without the printing press, you have no means of disseminating printed books except hand printed books, which is very expensive to create. So,
and very time consuming.
Very time consuming. Well, they're expensive because they're time consuming.
Right.
Some sucker sits there by hand illuminating the manuscript. I mean, good luck with that.
Yeah. So that's actually, that should be my excuse. The reason why the fans haven't got the third book, they have. I'm just handwriting them individually. And so only like 6 people over the last 7 years have gotten a copy so far. Just I'm handwriting, I'm hand copying each one and then sending it out. And then it takes me a while, man. It takes some time. I don't believe in that old print and press. I think that's just a fad. That's going to go away. That's why I still have my black and white TV, man, because that color TV, that's a fad. No one's going to keep that. It's going to be black and white again soon. That's what I believe.
Okay, so we drifted a little far off topic there. Bringing us back to religion. Let's talk a little bit about whether, actually, before we talk about whether the God is real, on the topic of flavors, my single biggest bugbear with religions is the mono nature of the church, the monolithic nature of the church.
And you're referring to as it relates to the entire world, or
yes.
as it relates to the entire everything.
Yes, because so many fantasy authors are like, no, this is the way everybody worships the god or the gods, and there's no spin-off to churches, there's no additional cults, I'm like, my dude, have you met our religions? There have been more religions that have died than there are religions that currently exist. In the religions that currently exist, they all have variations. Christianity alone has got the big ones, of course, are the Orthodox, the Roman Catholic, the Protestants. But within those, you have subdivisions. I mean, Protestantism has Calvinism, Lutheranism, Baptists. I mean, it just, the list goes on, you know? And then you're not even talking about things like LDS, Jehovah's Witnesses.
Right. But it even gets deeper than that. I mean, you know, I was raised Baptist, and I was raised Southern Baptist at that, you know, and so I went to church in, you know, Mississippi and Louisiana and Georgia, Alabama. And then I moved to the East Coast and I go to a Baptist church, and it's Baptist, sort of, but not the same. And then I get used to that. And I move out to California and go to a Baptist church, and that's a little different too. Even within, and they're all actually a part of the Baptist. I'm not even talking about, because Baptists, actually, there are different conferences of Baptists, but I'm actually talking about the same. And they're still very different from one location to another.
Yes. And that's it exactly. And I don't see enough of that variation. Like, no, I'm not saying that you've got to populate your world. Like, I mean, I don't think it's possible for one fantasy author to do the plethora of religions and sects and subsects and whatever that we have in our world. I get it.
But it also comes down to the whole complexity versus complication.
Yeah.
If you're just doing it for realism, then you're adding nothing but complication, or nothing but complexity for no complications. So you want to balance that out and just put what you need to make it more realistic. If you are using it in the story plot for whatever reason, you are getting complication out of it. So you can now afford to spend a little bit more time on the complexity, because it matters. But that does dovetail great into the next side of this.
Sorry, even for realism, you can do something as simple as the character walks into a church that's 2 towns over from, you know, his normal church, and the statue of the god, the head is turned the other way. And he can just have a moment of like, huh, that's weird. Like, that's it. That's all you need to do to show that there's some diversity of worship here.
And again, you're thinking about how complex is it? That's not complex at all. It's one little line of him going, wow, that's weird that the statue's looking the other way. I thought it was always supposed to look west. That one's looking east. I wonder if these guys are heathens. You know, should I be on my toes? Whatever. But that dovetails really well into the differences between the gods being real and the gods not being real, versus also the gods being real and we know it, versus the gods are real, but we still have to have faith that they're real.
Mm.
Because you, as the world builder writer, you know either A, gods are not real at all, that these religions are literally based off of just myth and fantasy. You know that B, the gods are 100% real, but the people don't really know it for a fact. They have to work off of faith. Or, I think the third answer would just be that gods are real because they actually interact with people and people see them and can actually interact with them. It's one of the reasons why, and I always hate bringing up Fiend Folly since it may never even be a thing that anybody can actually even enjoy. But I have written a ton of stuff on it. But the main religion that is worshipped in Fiend Folly is the Church of Atheism. And there's two reasons why I do it. One, I think it's funny that you can have lunch with a god, an actual god, and just have lunch with them. So you don't have to have any faith that they exist. And there's a group of people that are like, nope, you did not have lunch with God. That God isn't even there. Doesn't exist. Like, dude, literally, he just slapped you. Nope, I wasn't slapped. What are you talking about? No one hit me.
As somebody who is very definitively an atheist, my argument would be not that I'm not saying that being doesn't exist, but I deny its divinity.
And then it turns your husband into a tree. But it's the same thing I was saying about the slap. So I just think it's funny. And then I also like picking on the Catholic Church. So the Church of Atheism in this world is modeled 100% off of the Catholic Church, which I also think is hilarious. So, but that's a tongue-in-cheek dick and fart joke comedy show. So very different from the other stuff that I actually make a living off of currently, which is much more serious and much more realistic and much more impactful to humanity. Those are just me picking on things. It would always boggle my mind when people would say, well, if you could make a deal with the devil, what would you get if you could just, anything you want? I was like, I'd always go, nothing, literally nothing. And like, what? Why? Like, because if the devil is real, then hell is real. And why would I ever sell my soul to a life, an eternity of torture for what, 50 years of something good happening to me? No. If the devil pops in front of me, then I just become really super religious. Like, everything in my life becomes worshiping God, everything, because then I would know it was real. There's no faith needed. Just so you guys know the difference between me and Marie, I'm not atheist. I'm actually agnostic. I do believe that man-made religions are pretty screwed, and they have a lot of bad things in them and a lot of human interventions. That's just what I believe. But I'm definitely not an atheist. I definitely believe that there is something, or at least not definitely is, because I guess agnostics believe that there could possibly be.
Yeah.
So I haven't ruled it out.
So, of course, I haven't entirely ruled it out because you can't prove a negative. So I can't prove that God doesn't exist any more than, any theist can prove that God does exist. I mean, these are not provable questions.
Right. Which is why it's so funny that I have friends, happen also to be writers, but they are so much in the atheist camp that they've joined the Church of Atheism. And I know I just said I have it in my fantasy world, but it actually exists. You can Google it. And the funniest thing about it is that he spends his Sundays going around his neighborhood passing out literature on the fact that God isn't real. They also have a service that they go to. And I'm like, dude, if the reason why I'm agnostic is I don't want to get up early on Sundays and I just want to stay home and watch football. Like, why would I join an anti-religion where I still have to go to services on Sunday and still have to go out and talk to people about my religion? Like,
definitely not that committed.
I'm going to sit at home and watch football. That's what I'm going to do.
So on the deal with the devil thing, because this was actually a discussion that Drake and I had earlier, I would probably make the deal with the devil if the devil appeared in front of me, because even if you can incontrovertibly prove to me that the God as described in the Christian Bible is real, the Christian Bible as it is written now, let's pick a version, the King James version, I still wouldn't worship it, even if it's like you will go to hell, because the God as described in there is capricious, vengeful, mean, and supposedly could have created a perfect world and chose not to. I can't. I can't.
And my answer to that was, you're gonna be the only one in hell then. Like, because all the rest of us are gonna be like, nope. If I'm not gonna go to an eternity of pain and misery when I can just be good to people for 80 years and then go to a land of milk and honey and rainbow farts, or unicorn farts, unicorn rainbow farts. That's what I was going for. It's not very good if you have to tell a joke 3 times.
Oh.
But anyway, yeah. So I think she'd be very alone down there, which for me would be my own personal hell. If even if they didn't torture me, they were like, "Are you just going to spend eternity by yourself? There's no one to talk to. There's no one to see. Nothing happens. You're just in a big blank void." That would be the worst possible.
There'd probably be a couple of the other atheists with me. I know Christopher Hitchens felt the same way. So,
yeah. All right,
yeah.
maybe.
Yeah.
You wouldn't get me down there. Not if you proved to me that it was real. If you proved to me that it was real, then there was no faith. But it's sort of that same thing. There's that thought experiment of, so let's say you know some things to be fact. So you know for a fact there are 2 copies of this universe. You know this. There's no doubt in your mind. You've been proven that there is 2 exact identical copies. You know that there's an exact identical copy of you in the other universe, and everything is exactly identical in every single way. You also know that God is 100% real in one of those universes, but not the other. The thing you don't know is which universe you live in.
Yeah.
And so the thought exercise is, since you know 100% that God is real in 100% in one of those universes, but you don't know which one you are, do you take the chance?
So it's a variation on Pascal's wager, which is something theists that use sometimes, which is like, but what if you're wrong?
Right.
Okay. But what if I'm wrong? What if we're both wrong? What if it's not the Christian God that's real? What if it's the Islamic God? What if it's the old Roman gods? What if it's the Zoroastrianism God? What if it's Ahura Mazda that's real?
What if it's one of the Aztec gods?
What if it's one of the Aztec
gods? We're really screwing up because we're not killing anybody anymore sacrificially.
Yeah. What if it's, the dragon Panku, the giant Panku that gave birth to the world? We don't, like, there's too many variations for Pascal's wager to work. You know what I mean? Like,
what if Scientology's actually right?
Oh my goodness. I don't think I could bear that.
Just saying. You honestly don't know. I mean, that's the thing.
You can't prove a negative. But it does kind of, it's kind of the teacup argument. Like, I can't prove that there isn't a teacup orbiting the sun between the Earth and the sun. Like, I can't prove that. But you can't prove that it's there either. So really, it's a semantics argument. Like this.
That's why every time, because my family's still very, 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 very religious. And if I do get into a discussion about this with a cousin or whatever, I will always go to, okay, fine. I actually do have a religion that I truly believe in. I believe in last Tuesdayism. And that is the belief that the world was created last Tuesday, 100%, and everything it is. And the reason why it's such a great thought experiment is because you can't disprove it. Because they're like, well, that can't be real. I'm like, really? Why couldn't it be real? They're like, well, what about all the ancient artifacts? I'm like, yeah, they were created last Tuesday as old artifacts. Well, what about, I got pictures on my phone of me from Hawaii trip last year. Yeah, they were created last Tuesday. You didn't actually go to Hawaii. The pictures of you going to Hawaii were created last Tuesday. Like, literally, there's no way. And they're like, but I'm pregnant. Like, yeah, and you were created that way on Tuesday. Like, there's no way to prove that last Tuesdayism isn't a real religion. And so if anybody pushes me in a corner, that's what I always say. I'm a last Tuesdayist.
Yeah.
That's my religion.
The reason why I brought up the whole discussion around atheism and my personal belief that even if somebody could incontrovertibly prove to me that God is real, I still wouldn't worship him if he is what is described in the Bible, is because I think that there would be people like me. Like, I am, obviously there wouldn't be many people like me. Like, as you say, most of humanity would, choose to believe at that point. But there would be people.
Turning is a long time.
There would be people like me, who would be, for whatever reason, probably committed to being, no, yes, I see it's a powerful being. Yes, it is obviously an incredibly powerful non-human entity. I do not grant its divinity, and so I will not worship.
Let's take that and wrap it back down, because we're almost out of time. Let's wrap that back around into How does it relate to storytelling, in your opinion? So we have a world
Yeah.
where we know the gods are real,
Yeah.
but you have a character. Why don't they believe? Like, how do we wrap that into the writing side of it?
So I think that it is very interesting to have such a person in a conflict position, either as a POV character or as somebody that the POV character encounters that challenges the POV's belief. Right? He says, yes, sure, your God is real, or the magic that your God grants you is real, but your God says all of these things, and yet all of these things happen. How do you justify granting divinity to such a thing? Because it is divine because you make it divine.
Mm-hmm.
Because you could also make it an evil spirit, right? Because it's a matter of perception. And I think that that would be an interesting thing to hit a religious character in the face with.
Absolutely. We always want to add complications. That's what as a writer, that's what I'm always looking for. How do I make it harder? That's one of the big discussions, and I've kind of said this before. There's one of the writers of the realm who really does like his characters too much, in my opinion. And so one of the things I'm constantly pushing him for is like, nope, we're gonna, because I'll say something like, we're gonna throw this at him, and like, oh, that's too hard. He wouldn't be able to succeed with him. Like, you're right. So how do we now how does he work through that? How does he succeed? Like, one of the characters was already behind the eight ball with all this other stuff, and one of the last things I threw onto this character before we started writing him was, oh, he also has a gimp leg. He can't bend his left leg at all. It's like, wait a minute, he's a hero. He's going to be going out and doing all this crazy stuff. Yeah, he is going to be doing all that crazy stuff with a gimp leg. So how is he gonna be able to fight on horseback and do all this crazy magic stuff and fight evil throughout the land with a gimp leg? Because I say that all the time in my world building class. Limitations are way more interesting than abilities. Superman is undefeatable. He's not that interesting, in my opinion. Batman is just a dude. His equipment can fail at any time, and then he just dies. It's one of the things that I loved about the beginning of the boys, where they were just dudes trying to kill gods. I really hated that they took them to give them god powers, because now it's just gods killing gods, and oh well, that's not very interesting. But squishy little marshmallow people that have no powers fighting invulnerable gods, that is interesting. That is a complication that I want to see how you get through, because again, it's about the reader, it's about the viewer. So it's not about you being nice to your character so that they don't have these complications to get through the story. It's about you making me, the reader, interested in seeing how that character gets through these complications. And that's why I love taking it to 11. And so, like, with that character, it was like, oh dude, he's not gonna be able to do it. I'm like, he might not. That's very possible, but we're gonna find out, because he's got a gimp leg. He can't bend his left leg. But that's what's going to attract the readers to him. They're gonna be like, oh my goodness, how does this guy, who absolutely cannot do what he's about to do, how does this guy succeed in that? And that's drama. That's interesting. That's what pulls the reader in. And so, same with religion. That's what you're trying to do with your religion. You're trying to find out ways to add complications that make it very difficult for your hero to achieve the overcome. They're going to achieve it. We all know that we're going to. I write nothing but happy ending stories. If you come into my stories, I guarantee you, well, I've got some tragedies maybe in mind, and my happy ending stories are always tragic. There's a lot of pain to get to that overcome, because again, I just said I make everything as hard as I possibly can on them, including killing people that they love, or that may even be main characters or whatever. Everyone knows that I've done that before. I'm no George Martin, but I do kill POV characters. But it still comes down to, how do I make it interesting for the reader? Because they're the only thing real in this relationship. None of these others are real. And so when I'm thinking about religion, at least, that's what I really push myself on. How do I make it feel real so that it adds complications, but it adds less complexity than the complication bonus that I'm getting for this stuff being added to the story?
And I think that that is a great note on which to do our closing credits. So at this point, my second book has been released, and it is available on Amazon.com, or you can head over to my YouTube channel, links for both my Amazon profile and my YouTube channel down below, and hit the subscribe button and watch a couple of videos. That would be great.
And as everybody should know by now, I lost last year to cancer, but I am working like a madman. So I've got the only thing I've really got is that screenplay that I kind of novelized a little bit. I call it a hybrid screenplay. It's Nurse, a magical fairy tale that is available on Amazon. And then I'm just working on stuff. Drake U is coming along. We're recording videos for it. We're getting much more organized with that. And then just a ton of different products for the Drake U brand, the Drake's Brutal Writing Advice series. June, like I said, of 23 is when that rewritten Farmers and Mercenaries will come out. But what I do say is, if you want to keep up with it, go to starvingwriterstudio.com and please join my mailing list, because that's the only way for me to let you know when this stuff is coming out, how it's coming out. Plus, we're going to be doing all sorts of free short stories set in the realm, backstories to some of these characters, other free stuff, writing tips and advice and everything like that.
And on that note, we will see you soon for another one.
Bye.